Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for the Smithsonian Institute and all the sponsors for the meeting. I said today I'm a little more dressed up than I normally am, but I have a Hellbender tie, and I have very few occasions to wear that, so this seemed appropriate. And I'd also like to thank, before I start, Jeff Ettling, Dr. Jeff Ettling, who's our curator of herpetology who leads this program. And I'm giving the talk as director of the St. Louis Wildcare Institute, which is our conservation arm. This is one of 12 centers in the Institute for Conservation Medicine that we support. Well, what is a hellbender? It's an amphibian, it's a large aquatic salamander, and there are two subspecies, the eastern Cryptobranchus alleghaniensis, and the Ozark hellbender, Cryptobranchus bishopi. They live only in cool, clear streams with moderate current. Cryptobranchus in Greek means hidden gills, and they have relatives, the Chinese giant salamander, which is shown here on the upper right, and the Japanese giant salamander. And I was told to bring visuals, and here's a life-size model of a Missouri hellbender. So you can see for a salamander, these are up to several pounds. They're a very large amphibian. Hellbender is a kind of an interesting name, but it's not the best of them. They've been called in colloquialisms mud devils, devil dogs, Allegheny alligators, and who could not love a snot otter? The range here, and I'll walk away for a minute, I hope you can hear me. This is the eastern hellbender, and the eastern hellbender also occurs in Missouri. And then this is the Ozark hellbender. Missouri is the only state to have both, we used to say subspecies, I think now they've been classified as species. Interestingly enough, the eastern only occurs in northern flowing streams in Missouri. They all end up in the Mississippi at some point. And the Ozark hellbender only exists in south flowing streams that go through Arkansas. And so Missouri is the only state to have both subspecies. They're declining, and we know they were declining first with the Ozark hellbender. We held a meeting 10 years ago where some of the eastern folks said, well, you know, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, it's a problem there, but we've seen that problem, whatever it is, spread across the country, and all hellbenders are declining. We believe it's due to multiple factors: habitat degradation, things like siltation. I mentioned they need cool, running clear water. Water quality. I always say, in a gross oversimplification, remember that amphibians are often sensitive to contaminants in parts per billion, where mammals and perhaps ourselves are sensitive in parts per million. There's predation with turtles and snakes and some of the introduced fish in Missouri. Disease, the amphibian chytrid fungus, and abnormalities. We're seeing many hellbenders, like this one here on the right, missing limbs. What we really like to say is they're the canary in the coal mine, perhaps, for the Ozark ecosystem. In 2003, the eastern and Ozark hellbenders were listed as endangered in Missouri. In 2006, we formed the Ron Gollner Center for Hellbender Conservation. More about that in just a moment. And in 2011, the Ozark hellbender was federally listed as endangered. The Ron Gollner Center was named after the man whose passion drove this. And if any of us ever doubt that one man's passion can make something happen, this is a case to prove that point. Ron unfortunately died of cancer in 2005. The goals were to reproduce the whole Ozark hellbender. They had never been done in captivity, nor any of the hellbenders in captivity, although the Asian giant salamanders had been reproduced, to retain that breeding stock and to eventually do reintroductions. Well, to breed hellbenders, it's not for an individual pair takes some facilities, but we've bred over 7,000, so we've pretty much filled the basement of our reptile house with aquariums and different breeding facilities for the hellbenders. We even have an outdoor stream that was built with support from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. You see that in the upper right. This is all the support system for that stream behind. And you see that cage door open on the top? The hellbenders don't crawl out. That's to keep the raccoons from getting in and grabbing a hellbender. So the reproduction process. We had infertile clutches for 2007 through 2010. But in October, we had the world's first captive breeding of hellbenders. And if you think puppies and kittens and baby animals of other species are cute, that little hellbender on the left, it doesn't get any better than that. And that's a juvenile on the right. So I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but to say that we've had multiple clutches. My comment when we first bred them, anybody can have a one-time event. But now we've bred multiple subspecies from different rivers with multiple pairs of hellbenders, and as I said, over 7,000. One of the things, I'll go back a minute, we do is we keep the different river systems separate because we're not sure yet of the different adaptations in each river. So the White River, the North Fork, they're all held in different places and only bred with each other. We felt that for successful reproduction, it was adequate space, provision of nest boxes, which we also provide in the wild now, environmental cycling, water quality, getting it right in the zoo and human care, to mimic those clear, fast-running Ozark streams, a good sex ratio of the animals, and animal health. In recognition of this project, we received the AZA's Edward Bean Award for most significant breeding, which is kind of like the Nobel Prize for zoos. So I won't go through all these numbers, but you can see how they're separated by river, and that our numbers overall. That's 4,000 at the zoo right now. There's 3,500 that have been released. At one point, 75% of the world's Ozark Hellbenders lived in the St. Louis Zoo's herpetarium basement because the wild population got down to an estimated 900 animals. Last year, we released 1,300 animals from 18 different clutches, and so far we've released what I mentioned, over 3,500 in the wild. Initial survivability studies are promising, and I'll tell one brief story. Our first release occurred with head-started Hellbenders from wild-caught eggs before we were doing the breeding. So we reduce them when they're about this big so they don't get eaten by trout and other predators. And they had transponders. And I had the good fortune to go out with them on the first time that we looked for them. And of the 11 animals released, we found 10 and alive. And we found the 11th transponder in a pile of otter poop. So at least the animal died a natural death. So that doesn't mean we've beaten the odds yet, but at least the initial results are hopeful and encouraging. I believe this is one of many programs that show the one-plan approach. That is, not creating artificial lines between wild populations and human care. And this certainly is one. They went from the wild, they came in, and fortunately within less than 10 years were able to reinforce the wild population. Saving species, and I always use that word advisedly because I think it's a loaded term, but it costs money. And at our institute, we've spent over $1.3 million, almost $1.4 million over the past 12 years, including a $300,000 grant from the Love Foundation. Additionally, almost $300,000 from the Missouri Department of Conservation and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. One of the stories I love to tell is when we launched Wild Care 14 years ago, our development people said, well, we can raise money for those zebra programs and those cheetah programs, but what are we going to do about American burying beetles and hellbenders? Who cares? And I'm a firm believer it's how you tell the story. Those are our two biggest fundraising centers, hellbenders and American burying beetles. We're scrambling to find money for the others. So one donor's given $175,000 for American burying beetles because she likes the life story. I think we ought to look at other funding sources. I've always said that if they could do bikers for babies, motorcycle groups, why can't we go to Harley-Davidson and do Harleys for Hellbenders? That certainly has black leather motorcycle jacket in my mind written all over it. I think it's also important as a zoo that we present our story at the zoo. We have 3.2 million annual visitors. So those on the left, we're telling about some of our amphibian support in the field. And this is the Hellbender exhibit with a short video that talks about the programs. And the face there is the head of reptile conservation for the Missouri Department of Conservation, Dr. Jeff Brigler. So to the future, we'll continue breeding Hellbenders as long as they need reinforcement. We'll continue head starting them for the release in the wild from ones that are eggs that have been brought in. And ultimately, it's all about producing many more of these in Ozark rivers and streams. So I don't want to say we beat extinction yet. I think that's a little bit too presumptuous, but I think we've taken some major steps in the right direction. I'd also like to thank our collaborators. Our previous speaker mentioned collaboration. We couldn't have done this without all our collaborators, Missouri, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Arkansas, and other institutions. So thank you for your attention.